Delmar Vera was born on December 5, 1997, in Philadelphia to Pedro Vera and Lusada Quiz, Puerto Rican immigrants who had settled in North Philadelphia and were building a life for their growing family. The couple already had two sons, ages 5 and 4, and the arrival of their newborn daughter brought a renewed sense of happiness and stability into their household. Pedro worked as a car mechanic, providing for the family, while Lusada remained at home managing daily responsibilities and caring for their children with attentiveness and devotion. Their two-story row house offered modest comfort, arranged to accommodate their family of 5. The upstairs level held the children's sleeping areas, including the front bedroom where Delmar's crib was placed. Lusada carefully tended to her newborn, feeding her, rocking her, and observing the quiet patterns of early motherhood that shaped their days. Pedro shared in the joy, expressing pride and affection for the baby girl who had completed their family unit and reinforced their plans for the future. The days following Delmar's birth passed in a calm and predictable rhythm. Family members adjusted to the presence of a newborn, and the older children became accustomed to their new sister's gentle presence in the home. Lusada maintained routines that ensured Delmar's comfort and safety, placing her carefully in her crib upstairs when the child slept. Each detail of the household environment reflected ordinary family life, grounded in care, responsibility, and an expectation of continued normalcy. Both parents believed they were entering a hopeful chapter. Delmar's birth symbolized continuity and growth, reinforcing their commitment to providing a secure home and loving environment. The family's interactions reflected contentment and mutual support, with no indication of the disruption that would soon follow. The household functioned within familiar patterns, filled with small moments of connection and shared responsibility that define early family experiences. Pedro and Lusada's emotional response to their daughter's arrival was rooted in affection and a sense of accomplishment. They embraced their roles with seriousness and warmth, focusing on the tasks of parenthood and the needs of their children. Delmar's presence became a central part of their daily lives, shaping their routines and reinforcing the bond that held their family together. This period represented the foundation of their story, a time defined by stability, love, and ordinary domestic life before the events that would unfold only 10 days later. In these early days, the household atmosphere reflected routine care and careful attention to every detail of newborn life. Lusada monitored Delmar's sleeping patterns, ensured her crib was properly arranged, and remained attentive to her needs throughout the day and night. Pedro observed these routines with quiet reassurance, confident that their family was progressing steadily. The setting remained calm, structured, and grounded in ordinary domestic responsibility, providing Delmar with a safe environment during the first moments of her life within their familiar home surroundings. On the day of the fire, Lusada was inside the family home tending to routine responsibilities when she suddenly heard a loud thud coming from the upstairs level where her newborn daughter was sleeping. Alarmed by the unexpected sound, she immediately rushed toward the staircase and hurried upward to investigate the source of the noise and check on Delmar's safety. As she approached the top of the stairs, she was met with heavy smoke drifting through the hallway and thick flames consuming the upper level of the home. Despite the danger, Lusada forced her way into the bedroom where Delmar's crib was positioned. Her attention went directly to the crib, but she was confronted with an unsettling sight. The crib was empty, and her baby was nowhere to be seen. In that moment, she also observed that the bedroom window was open, an unusual detail given the severity of the situation surrounding her. Driven by urgency and fear, Lusada retreated briefly, then attempted to re-enter the burning room a second time in a desperate effort to search more thoroughly for her child. During these attempts, she suffered burns and inhaled smoke, further endangering her health. Even as the fire intensified, her focus remained fixed on locating Delmar and understanding how the child could have disappeared in the midst of the unfolding emergency. Firefighters arrived and quickly began extinguishing the blaze, bringing the flames under control within a short period of time. As they worked, Lusada repeatedly attempted to explain that her daughter was not in the crib and had not been present in the room when she reached it. She insisted that Delmar was missing and expressed that the absence of the baby did not align with what officials were suggesting had occurred. Despite her statements, the responding firefighters maintained that the child had likely perished in the fire, and that Lusada was mistaken or overwhelmed by shock. They dismissed her repeated declarations and treated the situation as a tragic accident rather than a potential disappearance. This response created an immediate and troubling conflict between a mother's first-hand account and the official narrative formed at the scene. The central mystery of the case emerged at this moment. Lusada remained firm that her baby was not in the room, emphasizing the empty crib and the open window as factual elements she had personally observed. However, authorities continued to assert that Delmar had died in the blaze, establishing a position that directly contradicted Lusada's testimony. This initial clash between observation and assumption laid the foundation for the investigation that would follow. Throughout the exchange, Lusada persisted in repeating that she had seen an empty crib and had not found her daughter during either search attempt. Her continued insistence stood in contrast to the firefighters' conclusions, reinforcing the disconnect between personal observation and institutional determination at the stage of the unfolding incident. Fire department crews arrived and moved swiftly to contain the blaze, extinguishing the flames within minutes and securing the damaged upper level of the home. As the emergency response unfolded, Pedro was informed that his newborn daughter had supposedly perished in the fire. Firefighters presented him with a yellow plastic bag, explaining that it contained the remains of Delmar, reinforcing their conclusion that the child had been consumed by the flames during the incident. The contents of the bag were later determined not to be human remains, but instead the remnants of charred bedding from Delmar's crib, a detail that further conflicted with the official assurances provided at the scene. Despite this discrepancy, authorities proceeded with their initial assessment and documented the event as an accidental house fire. An official report concluded that the blaze had been caused by a homemade extension cord and asserted that Delmar had died as a result of the fire. Pedro and Lusada repeatedly challenged this conclusion, emphasizing that they had not seen their daughter in the crib and that no physical remains had been recovered from the scene. Their objections were met with resistance, and their concerns were ultimately disregarded by those responsible for determining the outcome of the incident. The absence of forensic confirmation did not alter the position taken by the responding agencies. A significant factor influencing the handling of the situation was the communication barrier faced by the parents. Both Pedro and Lusada spoke very little English, which limited their ability to clearly express their observations and advocate effectively for a more thorough investigation. Their efforts to explain that the crib had been empty and that the circumstances did not align with the official narrative were misunderstood or dismissed entirely. As a result of this barrier, the parents struggled to make their perspective fully understood within the formal investigative process. Their statements lacked the perceived clarity and authority necessary to challenge the conclusions already reached by officials. Consequently, the case was closed with the determination that Delmar had died in an accidental fire, despite the unresolved questions surrounding the absence of her body. The dismissal of their claims left Pedro and Lusada without immediate recourse, reinforcing a sense of powerlessness in the face of institutional decision-making. The fire department and related authorities treated the matter as resolved, and no further immediate investigative measures were pursued. This decision established a documented version of events that stood in direct opposition to the parents' first-hand accounts, creating a lingering conflict between official records and lived experience. Their inability to overcome these limitations meant that crucial concerns were not translated into formal action, allowing the official explanation to remain uncontested despite persistent objections. The process concluded with institutional certainty replacing parental testimony, leaving an unresolved void where meaningful examination of the missing child's circumstances might otherwise have occurred under existing procedural and communicative constraints. On the day of the fire, an unexpected visit took place when Pedro's cousin, by marriage, Carolyn Correa, arrived at the family home without prior notice or close familiarity with their lives. Her appearance was unusual, as she had not been a regular presence and had not maintained a meaningful relationship with Pedro or Lusada, making the visit immediately stand out in hindsight. Carolyn explained that she was experiencing mechanical issues and asked Pedro if he could inspect her car, a request he agreed to fulfill. While Pedro attended to the vehicle outside, Carolyn entered the home and began interacting with Lusada, a woman she had never previously met in a personal capacity. Their conversation was limited and awkward, shaped by unfamiliarity and constrained exchanges. During this interaction, Carolyn mentioned that she had also recently had a baby, a statement that established a point of comparison between their circumstances. She then accompanied Lusada upstairs, where Delmar was resting in her crib, and observed the newborn directly. The brief visit to the bedroom uncomfortably lingered in Lusada's memory as subsequent events unfolded. Shortly afterward, Carolyn claimed that she had forgotten her purse inside the home and indicated she needed to retrieve it. She left and later returned, stating that the purse had been left upstairs. This second entry occurred close in time to the outbreak of the fire, marking a critical moment in the timeline of the incident. The sequence of her movements, combined with the absence of a close familial bond, began to raise concerns in the minds of both Pedro and Lusada. As they reflected on the day's events, Carolyn's presence became a focal point of unease and suspicion, grounded in the timing and nature of her actions. Although nothing overtly incriminating occurred during her visit, the circumstances surrounding her behavior appeared inconsistent with the casual explanation she offered. The deliberate return under the pretext of retrieving a forgotten item and the proximity of that moment to the fire intensified doubts about her intentions. These observations did not immediately lead to formal accusations, but instead contributed to a growing internal belief that the visit was not coincidental. Pedro and Luzaida began to connect her unexplained appearance with the sudden disappearance of their child, forming the foundation of their suspicions. Every detail of the encounter was later reconsidered through the lens of the tragedy that followed, reinforcing their conviction that her involvement warranted closer attention and scrutiny. From the parents' perspective, the visit no longer appeared routine, but instead seemed marked by deliberate timing and unexplained intent. Their recollection of her brief contact with the infant and her withdrawal from the home became increasingly significant when viewed alongside the immediate emergency that followed. These elements collectively shaped a narrative of concern rooted entirely in direct observation and consistent memory. Nothing within the exchange provided reassurance or clear explanation either. Following the fire, the years that unfolded placed immense emotional strain on Pedro and Luzaida as they struggled to process the unexplained loss of their daughter and the unresolved nature of the official conclusions. Despite being told that Delmar had died, both parents remained convinced that she was still alive, a belief that persisted as time passed and daily life attempted to continue. The weight of uncertainty steadily eroded the stability of their relationship. Grief, frustration, and unanswered questions created tension within the household, and by 2002, their partnership ultimately came to an end. Each parent carried personal feelings of blame and responsibility, yet their shared conviction that Delmar had not perished in the fire never disappeared. During this period, Pedro experienced a brief but significant encounter with Carolyn and a young child she identified as her daughter. He immediately felt that the child bore an unmistakable resemblance to Delmar, reinforcing his belief that the baby taken from their home had survived. Although this encounter left a lasting impression, Pedro lacked the means to pursue any formal action or prove his suspicions within an official setting. Luzaida shared this sense of helplessness, feeling restricted by limited financial resources and institutional indifference. Their inability to secure legal representation or demand renewed investigation left them without practical direction or support. Every attempt to move forward remained overshadowed by the belief that their child's disappearance had never been properly examined or resolved. As the years progressed, the separation between Pedro and Luzaida did not diminish their shared sense of injustice. They continued to view the case through the same lens of doubt, remembering the circumstances surrounding the fire and the unanswered questions that followed. Their powerlessness became a defining element of this stage, representing a prolonged period where emotional suffering and logistical barriers prevented meaningful progress. Throughout this time, the combination of financial hardship and lack of authoritative attention meant their concerns remained unaddressed. The absence of viable investigative options reinforced their isolation and deepened their frustration. This phase of the story reflects a painful endurance marked by unresolved grief, suspicion, and the quiet persistence of parental belief under constraining circumstances. They occupied separate lives after the separation, yet the emotional aftermath of the fire remained deeply intertwined with every aspect of their existence. Pedro continued to recall the image of the child he had seen with Carolyn, replaying the moment and reaffirming his certainty that Delmar had been taken rather than lost. Luzaida maintained her conviction privately, holding on to the same quiet assurance that her daughter would one day be found. However, their limited finances and lack of institutional support prevented any renewed appeals for investigation. The inability to hire private assistance or request formal testing reinforced their stagnant position. This period became defined by emotional distance, lingering regret, and an unbroken sense of unresolved responsibility toward the child they believed remained. During a family birthday party in 2004, Lusada attended a gathering where Carolyn Correa was also present with a 6-year-old girl she identified as her daughter. As Lusada observed the child, she experienced an immediate and unsettling recognition of familiar features that closely resembled both her and Pedro, reinforcing her long-held belief that Delmar had survived the fire and remained alive. The child's appearance, including facial structure and noticeable similarities, strengthened Lusada's conviction and transformed quiet suspicion into actionable certainty. Faced with this realization, Lusada made a calculated decision to obtain physical evidence that could support her belief. She approached the girl and told her that she had gum tangled in her hair, using the situation as a plausible reason to handle her without drawing unwanted attention. Under the guise of helping the child remove the gum, Lusada carefully pulled several strands of hair and secured them discreetly, ensuring the act remained unnoticed by others in attendance. This moment represented the first tangible effort to gather evidence that could later substantiate her claim through scientific verification. Until this point, her certainty had been supported only by memory and emotional conviction, but the hair sample introduced the possibility of objective confirmation. Lusada's actions reflected a deliberate attempt to move beyond helplessness and toward a concrete method of proving what she believed to be true. The encounter marked a turning point in the case, shifting from years of unresolved grief to the initiation of measurable proof. Lusada's decision was driven by her immediate recognition and the undeniable resemblance she perceived, motivating her to preserve physical material that could potentially connect the child directly to her own missing daughter. Although the gathering itself continued as planned, the significance of this act remained profound. The quiet removal of hair, performed in a controlled and precise manner, symbolized the first step toward challenging the narrative that had prevailed since the day of the fire. It established a factual foundation for subsequent efforts to pursue formal confirmation and renewed investigative attention. This incident demonstrated Lusada's resolve and determination under emotionally complex circumstances. Rather than confronting Carolyn directly or creating disruption, she chose a method that relied on subtlety and foresight. Her decision underscored the seriousness of her belief and the depth of her commitment to uncovering the truth surrounding Delmar's disappearance. In that moment, her role shifted from grieving mother to active participant in the search for verifiable answers. The birthday party encounter became the pivotal instance where suspicion transitioned into evidence gathering, setting in motion the next phase of the case based on observable action and restrained persistence. Her decision at the party did not involve confrontation or accusation, but instead reflected a strategy rooted in observation and restraint. The collected strands of hair became the only link capable of supporting her claim with measurable certainty through future testing and official review. Following the birthday party encounter, Lusada sought assistance beyond her immediate resources, and decided to approach State Representative Angel Cruz to present her concerns and request formal support. During a meeting, she detailed the circumstances surrounding her daughter's disappearance and the evidence she believed connected the child in Carolyn's care to Delmar Vera. Cruz considered her account and determined that her claims warranted further attention, agreeing to advocate for renewed investigation and official DNA testing. With his intervention, authorities moved forward to examine the hair sample Luzada had collected and arranged for scientific comparison through established forensic procedures. The testing process focused on determining whether the genetic material matched that of Luzada, providing a measurable method for confirming biological identity. When the results were returned, they verified that the child was in fact Delmar Vera, directly contradicting the long-standing assumption that she had died in the fire. This confirmation prompted immediate institutional response. Delmar was removed from Carolyn's custody and placed into state care, while further evaluations and legal actions took place. The decision ensured that the child would remain under protective supervision while the circumstances of her disappearance and unauthorized placement were reviewed within formal channels. Simultaneously, authorities arrested Carolyn on multiple charges linked to the disappearance and unlawful retention of the child. Her detention marked the official reopening of the case and transformed it from a dismissed incident into an active criminal investigation. These developments shifted the narrative from unresolved suspicion to verified fact, establishing a legally supported foundation for further proceedings. The confirmation through DNA evidence represented the first authoritative acknowledgement of Luzada's long-held belief. What had previously been dismissed as emotional insistence became recognized as substantiated truth, forcing institutional systems to re-examine earlier conclusions and procedural decisions. The involvement of Angel Cruz played a crucial role in elevating the concern to a level where formal methods were employed and accountability was pursued. This phase signaled a decisive transition from personal struggle to structured inquiry. The reopened case now involved documented evidence, genetic verification, and legal oversight, shifting the focus toward rectifying the failures of earlier investigations. Delmar's placement in state custody underscored the seriousness of the situation and the necessity for careful oversight as further determinations were made based on verified information and established investigative standards. Throughout this process, Luzada's role remained focused on cooperation and providing clarity as officials carried out their renewed responsibilities under procedural guidelines. The progression from appeal to confirmation illustrated the impact of formal advocacy and systematic testing when applied to unresolved circumstances. Authorities now operated with verified biological connection, ensuring the case proceeded through legitimate channels and structured review. The sequence of appeal, testing, confirmation, custody transfer, and arrest established a documented framework that acknowledged previously overlooked evidence and initiated accountability, reinforcing the importance of methodical investigation supported by tangible proof and recognized legal authority in transparency measures. Carolyn's prior history became a significant focus as investigators examined her background following the confirmation that Delmar Vera had been taken from her family. Records revealed that Carolyn had previous involvement with arson, including a conviction related to setting a former workplace on fire after her employment had been terminated for fraudulent activity. This history introduced a pattern of deliberate actions that raised further concerns about her credibility and behavior. In addition to her arson history, Carolyn had made false claims regarding pregnancy, asserting that she had been expecting a child around the same time Delmar was born. These assertions were central to the narrative she had presented to others and became an important aspect of the investigation once formal inquiries resumed. Her personal relationship with a man named Andre Moore also came under scrutiny. Carolyn had informed him that she was pregnant and that he was the father of the baby, a claim he later challenged. A paternity dispute followed, with Andre questioning the legitimacy of her statements and ultimately seeking clarification through appropriate testing, which did not support her account. During legal proceedings, expert testimony was introduced by a forensic psychologist who diagnosed Carolyn with pseudo-IS, a condition described as a false belief of pregnancy. The expert suggested that she may have genuinely believed the child was hers, framing her actions within a context of psychological misperception rather than calculated intent. This diagnosis was presented as a possible explanation for her behavior and decisions. However, the court did not accept this interpretation. The presiding judge rejected the assertion that Carolyn's actions were the result of delusion and instead characterized her behavior as manipulative and intentional. This assessment directly influenced the outcome of the trial process and the legal response to her conduct. Based on the court's determination and the accumulation of evidence, Carolyn was sentenced to a term of 9 to 30 years in prison. The ruling reflected the court's position that her actions constituted criminal conduct rather than a psychological misunderstanding. This decision concluded the judicial evaluation of her role in the case, formally establishing accountability and marking a critical point in the legal resolution of the events surrounding Delmar Vera's disappearance and recovery. This portion of the investigation emphasized how Carolyn's documented past became integral to understanding the context of her actions. Each prior incident, including the arson conviction and disputed pregnancy narrative, was evaluated to establish consistency in her reported behavior. The court considered the psychological testimony alongside physical evidence and case documentation, ultimately prioritizing observable conduct over clinical explanation. In doing so, the legal system underscored its position that responsibility remained with Carolyn regardless of any claimed mental condition. This reinforced the formal conclusion that her history demonstrated intent rather than misunderstanding, completing the representation of her role within the broader investigative frame. Delmar's reintegration into her biological family began under close observation and structured planning after her identity was confirmed through DNA testing. Child psychologists recommended that the transition be gradual, emphasizing stability, patience, and consistency as essential elements in helping her adjust to unfamiliar surroundings and people. Their guidance reflected concern for Delmar's emotional well-being and the need to rebuild attachment safely over time. Despite those professional recommendations, the state governor issued a decision that Delmar should be returned to her biological family as quickly as possible. This directive accelerated the reunification process and established immediate contact between Delmar and Luzada, marking the first direct interaction since the child had been taken years earlier. The meeting became a defining moment in the recovery process. During their first encounter, Delmar initially responded with visible hesitation, staying close to her surroundings before slowly approaching Lusada. Observers noted the natural progression of curiosity and recognition as the child engaged with the woman identified as her mother. The interaction unfolded without coercion, allowing Delmar to determine her own comfort level within the new environment. As the moment continued, Delmar's emotional response shifted from guarded uncertainty to engagement. She moved closer, eventually demonstrating familiarity and acceptance through her physical gestures and verbal responses. Lusada remained calm and composed, allowing the child to interact at her own pace while maintaining a steady presence. This initial interaction provided visible insight into the emotional dynamics of reunification. The child's evolving reaction illustrated a developing connection that psychologists had suggested should be carefully fostered rather than rushed. Nevertheless, the immediate reunion proceeded under the authority of the governor's ruling, reinforcing the urgency placed on restoring the biological parent-child relationship. Following this encounter, Delmar entered a period of adjustment within her biological family, supported by structured oversight and continued monitoring. The process emphasized emotional adaptation, gradual trust development, and integration into a new familial setting shaped by historical absence and reunion. Lusada's role during this phase focused on creating reassurance while respecting Delmar's individual responses. The measured approach recommended by specialists underscored the importance of continuity and consistency. Their advice reflected recognition of the psychological impact caused by prolonged separation and the complexity involved in reestablishing familial bonds. Despite these cautions, the swift return symbolized a procedural commitment to restoring the rightful parental relationship without prolonged delay. The first meeting between mother and child therefore represented both emotional significance and procedural resolution. It marked the beginning of Delmar's reintegration, balancing professional guidance with executive decision, and illustrated a careful intersection between institutional authority and personal experience. The reunion demonstrated the possibility of connection after separation, while acknowledging the ongoing process required to rebuild trust and stability. Every step forward reflected coordination between protective services and family members, ensuring emotional consideration remained central while Delmar adjusted to newly restored identity, structure, and belonging within her biological household environment and daily continuity. ORC. These findings shaped the official narrative and informed subsequent judicial reasoning. Pedro and Lusada pursued legal action following Delmar's return, filing lawsuits that challenged the handling of the original investigation and the decisions made by local authorities. Their claims addressed procedural failures, inadequate response, and the manner in which the disappearance had been dismissed, despite the absence of remains and unresolved concerns. These lawsuits sought accountability, but were ultimately dismissed, closing that legal avenue. At the same time, disputes regarding Delmar's custody emerged. Pedro sought expanded parental rights, while Lusada raised objections based on differences in their positions and past involvement. The court weighed these arguments and issued determinations in accordance with documented records and legal standards, finalizing custody arrangements within a formal judicial framework. As the case attracted widespread attention, media coverage expanded significantly. Delmar's story became a subject of public interest, resulting in increased visibility and exposure beyond the immediate family circle. Interviews, reports, and public discussion transformed the private ordeal into a widely recognized narrative, altering the family's experience of daily life and privacy expectations. This attention extended into entertainment formats when the Lifetime Network produced a film adaptation depicting the events surrounding Delmar's disappearance and recovery. The dramatized portrayal brought renewed attention to the case and further intensified public awareness. While the film contributed to broader recognition, it also reinforced the prolonged spotlight placed upon the family and their circumstances. Delmar herself experienced moments of public visibility as a result of this exposure, including appearances connected to media interest and representation. The transition from private recovery to public narrative introduced additional complexity to her adjustment process and continued integration into a stable family environment. Despite these challenges, reports indicated that the family gradually adapted to a more normalized existence. Daily routines resumed and efforts were made to restore balance and consistency following prolonged disruption. The emphasis shifted toward stability, emotional recovery, and maintaining a structured environment away from the heightened drama previously experienced. As years passed, legal consequences reached an additional turning point when Carolyn Correa was granted parole in 2013. Her release marked the conclusion of her period of incarceration and brought administrative closure to her role within the case. The decision reflected institutional processes governing sentencing and release, independent of the emotional dynamics experienced by the family. By this stage, the case had transitioned from active legal battle to historical record. The family's reported ability to adjust underscored resilience and perseverance amid extraordinary circumstances. Although the public narrative gradually softened, the long-term impact of the events remained embedded within their shared history, shaping their perspective on justice, responsibility, and familial recovery. The final phase reflected legal resolution, public exposure, and eventual stabilization. It demonstrated how institutional decisions, media representation, and personal endurance converged, allowing the family to move forward while preserving the reality of what had occurred. Their story concluded not with spectacle, but with determination to regain normal life beyond the reach of scrutiny.